After murder in the mansion, a surprise break in the case.
MPD has identified a suspect, 34-year-old Daron Dylon Wint.
Also tonight, justice for an American soldier killed in Iraq. A police officer is killed in the line of duty. Survivors include her newborn baby. And John Sutherland's incredible feat.
He's not human, in my opinion.
This is the CBS Evening News with Scott Pelley.
This is our Western edition. Tonight, there's a manhunt on in the murders of a family and their housekeeper. 4 victims, some beaten and stabbed, discovered in a burned-out mansion in Washington, D.C. The police identified the suspect today as Daron Dylon Wint, who came to the United States from Guyana 15 years ago. Wyatt Andrews says surprising evidence revealed today came from an unexpected source.
The break in this case came from a pizza delivered to the house as the Savopoulos family and a housekeeper were held captive Wednesday night a week ago. Investigators took DNA from skin cells left on the pizza crust. The ATF then matched that DNA to the suspect, 34-year-old Daron Dylon Wint.
We do believe that there is a connection.
D.C. Police Chief Kathy Lanier said Wint worked at a business owned by the family he's accused of terrorizing, American Iron Works, a steel company headed by Savopoulos. Savopoulos, his wife Amy, their 10-year-old son Philip, and housekeeper Vera Figueroa were found dead last Thursday after a fire at the house. 3 of the bodies showed signs of blunt force trauma or stab wounds.
Right now, it does not appear that this was just a random crime.
Investigators believe the crime began with the family held and possibly abused for around 12 hours in an extortion plot that ended last Thursday. The couple, Sava and Amy, tried to send text and voicemail warnings to a second housekeeper telling her to stay away from work. One of Sava's assistants then brought $40,000 in cash on Thursday morning and left it on the porch. Late on Thursday, after the murders, police say Wint is the man seen in this surveillance video. This spot is near where the family's stolen Porsche was left in a church parking lot and torched, and near the suspect's home in Lanham, Maryland. A neighbor, Devera Zainal, said Wint came from a loving family.
You know, I know he was raised properly. I know they taught him what was right from wrong.
Analysts were able to match Wint's DNA because of his long arrest record in Maryland, including 5 different charges for second-degree assault. Maryland collects the DNA of almost everyone arrested. On Wint's Facebook page, his photos alternate between smiles and pride in his muscular shape. His caption for this picture, "This is what Black Jesus looked like." For most of today, the manhunt focused in Brooklyn, New York, where investigators thought that Wint would be visiting a girlfriend. That went nowhere. Scott, at the moment, police are hopeful that they can make an arrest, but they don't know exactly where Wint is.
Wyatt Andrews at the scene of the crime for us tonight. Wyatt, thank you. Late today, a grand jury in Baltimore handed up indictments against those 6 police officers arrested in the death last month of Freddie Gray. The charges are similar to those announced earlier by the prosecutor, and they include a murder charge against the officer who was driving the police van in which Gray allegedly suffered his fatal spine injury. Cleanup crews are fighting 100,000 gallons of oil, some of it browning the beaches near Santa Barbara, California. They're digging up a pipeline today to see why it ruptured, and Danielle Nottingham has the latest.
18 boats skim 9 square miles of oil-stained waters today along California's central coast. More than 7,700 gallons of the oily mixture have been scooped up since the pipeline leaked as much as 105,000 gallons of crude. Sean Hastings is with the federal agency NOAA.
Oil and water don't mix, and so any oil in the water becomes very problematic for protecting wildlife, protecting the public.
More than 300 workers in protective suits raked and shoveled black sludge off the beaches. The cleanup is now a 24-hour operation. Plains All American runs the pipeline. In 2010, the company agreed to pay $41 million to repair and upgrade 10,000 miles of pipeline. Plains Senior Safety Director Patrick Hodgkins.
We continually look at safety as being our our primary focus and the operation of our equipment.
Officials say the spill is not moving south and that it could take weeks to clean up the oil. Danielle Nottingham, CBS News, Los Angeles.
Today, justice finally came for an American soldier killed in Iraq 8 years ago. A London cab driver was convicted of his murder. Turns out the suspect left crucial evidence on one of his bombs. Elizabeth Palmer is on this story.
IEDs, homemade bombs, turned Iraq's roads into lethal minefields for U.S. soldiers in Iraq. One of them killed 34-year-old Sergeant Randy Johnson when it went off under his armored vehicle in 2007. Fast forward 8 long years, and there's justice for Sergeant Johnson. Careful police work, forensic science, and a little bit of luck convicted Sardar of murder. Justice, too, for Specialist Joe Bacani, who was wounded trying to recover a bomb Sardar helped to build.
I could feel like the sun beating on me and like my own blood feeling hotter than that sun. And I could feel like I was losing a lot of blood.
British police flagged Sardar when he came home from the war in Iraq in 2007, not in connection with these incidents. And in 2012, they even raided his home and found a bomb-making manual. But it wasn't enough to charge him. The evidence for that came a year later. IEDs, intact and in pieces, had been collected in Iraq and shipped halfway across the world to the FBI's Terrorism Explosives Lab in Virginia. In 2014, bingo. Sardar's prints were lifted from a piece of tape on 2 bombs that had been planted on the roads west of Baghdad. British police finally had what they needed to go to court.
Sardar has reinvented himself carefully in London since returning as a black cab driver. The reality is he's a bomb maker, he's a terrorist, and he's been convicted of murder this afternoon.
Anis Abed Sardar will be back in court tomorrow morning, Scott, for sentencing. He's facing a mandatory life in prison for murder.
Liz Palmer reporting from our London newsroom tonight. Liz, thanks. 60,000 refugees are pouring out of the famed city of Palmyra, Syria, according to the UN. Overnight, the Islamic extremist group ISIS took control of the city and its priceless 2,000-year-old Roman colonnades, temples, and artifacts. Now, this much territory is controlled by ISIS, nearly half of Syria and a third of Iraq. Syrian government forces and the Iraqi army are both in retreat. Palmyra fell days after ISIS chased the Iraqi army out of Ramadi, a city of 500,000. ISIS is on the offense, its momentum unbroken by the U.S.-led campaign of airstrikes. Ramadi is the capital of Anbar province, where 1,300 Americans lost their lives. David Martin spoke with a former officer who is watching all he fought for lost to an Iraqi army in disarray.
When Vijay Tedesco led a task force of 1,000 men and women into Ramadi in the spring of 2006, it was probably Iraq's most dangerous city.
There was nothing but al-Qaeda in Iraq. They had created a very dense and very sophisticated defense in depth, using massive amounts of IEDs and everything else.
Now retired, Tedesco says his task force lost 14 tanks, but tanks can be replaced.
In 9 months in Ramadi, we lost 17 soldiers, Marines, and sailors operating in my task force or in the areas I controlled, and we had more than 100 wounded.
Sergeant Terry Lisk was killed by a mortar round, Sergeant Nicholas Gibbs by a sniper. But after 9 months of fighting, they had something to show for their sacrifice.
When we left in February of 2007, there were areas of the city that you could move freely about in that were unimaginable 9 months before that.
A year later, there was even a Ramadi soccer tournament. Now those hard-won gains have been wiped away by the inability of Iraqi troops, backed by American airstrikes, to stand up to ISIS, the successor to al-Qaeda in Iraq.
When you talk to soldiers in your battalion who were wounded, what do they say now?
There's a lot of bitterness and a lot of pain.
Tedesco himself feels a tangle of emotions: sadness, resignation, and anger.
Just legitimate anger.
Anger at?
And this is going to sound terrible, but frankly at politicians, both here and in Iraq.
On Memorial Day, Tedesco is going to Arlington National Cemetery to stand at the grave of Specialist Andrew Dahl.
I'm going to run into the mothers of other men and women, many of whom died in Ramadi and Anbar about the same time, who were buried around him. And it's going to be hard this year.
Tedesco lost 17 in his task force. A total of 83 Americans were killed in Ramadi during the time he was there. David Martin, CBS News, the Pentagon.
Today, Sweden scrambled fighter jets to intercept 2 Russian military planes that flew too close to Swedish airspace. With Russia flexing its military, 3 of its Baltic neighbors, Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania, have asked NATO to station troops there as a deterrent. Part of this test of wills is playing out in the air, as Holly Williams found.
On Europe's eastern frontier, NATO F-16s and Eurofighters drill for something they're doing more and more, intercepting Russian military aircraft flying too close for comfort to European airspace. This cockpit video shows NATO jets shadowing Russian planes, which often try to stay invisible by turning off their transponders. We watch the NATO pilots practice from a military transport plane. But last year in the Baltic states, they did this for real more than 150 times, a nearly 4-fold increase on 2013. If the NATO fighter jets don't intercept and identify the Russian military aircraft, the fear is they could cause a crash with a commercial airliner. With its dangerous tactics, Russia seems to be probing NATO's air defences and testing how the West will react. General Philip Breedlove is NATO's supreme commander in Europe.
Let's put it this way, it's certainly not the kind of behavior you would see between 2 partners.
And nor is this. In Ukraine last year, Russia seized Crimea and gave its military backing to armed rebels in the east of the country. The US accuses them of shooting down a Malaysian airliner in July. Lithuanian captain Yeva Gulbiniene told us many here fear their former Soviet overlords.
Occupation. This is what they're afraid for, because nobody wants to go back to the ages what was 25 years ago.
If Russia did what it's done in Ukraine to a NATO ally in Eastern Europe, how would NATO respond?
NATO is committed to defending its allies.
You would go to war with Russia?
We will defend any NATO nation that is attacked by any nation.
If NATO approves the permanent deployment of ground troops to the Baltic states, it will undoubtedly anger Russia. And Scott, that's because Moscow already accuses the West of encroaching on Russian interests.
Holly Williams in Brussels tonight, home of NATO headquarters. Holly, thank you very much. The U.S. Senate is expected to vote tomorrow on a 2-month extension of most of the provisions of the Patriot Act, the anti-terrorism surveillance law that's due to expire June 1st. Republican Rand Paul has been trying to block the extension on civil liberties grounds. He filibustered yesterday for nearly 11 hours before finally calling it quits just before midnight. The most controversial part of the Patriot Act allows the National Security Agency to collect and store the phone records of Americans. CBS This Morning's Norah O'Donnell asked Attorney General Loretta Lynch why she considers that so important.
But if that law expires on June 1st and you don't have the ability to collect that metadata, information on every phone call in the United States, what's your biggest fear?
Well, our biggest fear with the expiration of not just that part of it, but also our ability to track the electronic communications of terrorists as well as to obtain the records of terrorists is that we will lose important eyes on people who have made it clear that their mission is to harm American people here and abroad.
This is Loretta Lynch's first interview since becoming Attorney General, and you can see it tomorrow morning on CBS This Morning. A major reversal may be coming for an American institution. Today, the president of the Boy Scouts of America called for ending the Scouts' blanket ban on gay adult leaders. Robert Gates, the former defense secretary, said the ban is no longer sustainable and keeping it would be, quote, the end of us as a national movement. A police officer is gunned down a day before her premature daughter was due to leave the hospital. When the CBS Evening News continues. The death of a 29-year-old police officer in an Omaha hospital yesterday was especially tragic because she had recently given birth to a daughter. Here's Michelle Miller.
Officer Carrie Orozco was looking forward to bringing her daughter Olivia home today from the hospital, born prematurely in February. But the 7-year police veteran was killed in a shootout yesterday with 26-year-old Marcus Wheeler, a known gang member wanted in connection with another shooting. Wheeler was also killed. Omaha Police Chief Todd Schmatterer.
She was a friend, a popular officer, a top-notch person, and I just can't imagine that this has even happened in the city of Omaha. Owes her a debt of gratitude.
Officer Orozco had worked in the gang unit for 3 years, but was best known in the community as Coach K, where she ran a youth baseball team for the Omaha Boys and Girls Club. In a video put out by the police department, she talked about how much she loved coaching.
When I see kids in the neighborhoods playing out in the streets, and I tell them, hey, how old are you? Hey, you're 9. Hey, cool, you can join our baseball team. And a lot of it is changing the mind of these kids that what they see as cool isn't as cool as being responsible.
The Omaha Police Department says Officer Orozco is the first officer killed in the line of duty since 2003 and Scott, the first female ever killed on this force.
Michelle, thank you very much. Fighting a raging river to save a life when we come back. U.S. government forecasters said today there's close to a 100% chance that we'll experience El Nino conditions through next winter. El Nino is a warming of the Pacific Ocean. It usually brings a lot of rain to the West Coast, which could certainly use it. In Colombia, the police could only watch as a dog was swept away by a fast-moving river. Finally, when the current wasn't so strong, a police officer jumped in and made the rescue. If the dog's name isn't Lucky, it certainly should be, and will be right back. See John run, 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 run. Ben Tracy picks up the story there.
John Sutherland went for a run today. That doesn't sound remarkable until you know this.
Well, the last time I didn't run was May 25th, 1969.
John has run every day for 16,797 days in a row. He averages 11 miles each day in the hills near Los Angeles. That barely seems to stretch the limits of his 64-year-old frame.
First thing I think about every morning when I wake up is, where am I going to run today? What am I going to do today? It's my first thought every morning.
His legs operate like a pair of pistons, and John has put 192,000 miles on them. That's nearly 8 times around the Earth. But what has made him a running legend is this list. The United States Running Streak Association tracks more than 500 people who have run at least 1 mile every day for more than a year. John is number 1. His streak began when he was 18. His teammates on the track team inspired him to run every day for 1 year. John just never stopped. And in 46 years, that's not just a lot of running, it's running through a lot.
I assume you've had the flu.
A bunch of times.
I assume you've had days where a loved one died.
How about my father, the best friend of my life?
He's also had 10 broken bones, including a broken hip during a half marathon.
The next day I could barely lift my leg off the ground.
You ran every day on a broken hip.
Yeah. Set, let's go.
John coaches track at Notre Dame High School. Enzo Wright doesn't quite know what to make of his coach.
He's not human, in my opinion. But I don't know, it really gives us something to live up to.
What would it take for you not to run?
Death. It's not what I do, it's who I am. I am a runner. Runners run.
And that's why John Sutherland hasn't taken a day off since 1969. Ben Tracy, CBS News, Los Angeles.
And we'll continue our streak tomorrow night. For all of us at CBS News, all around the world, good night.